There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Down Low with Joe. I'm your co-host, Lewis Martin, founder of LMC, a specialized talent solutions agency dedicated to the climate technology space. Joe, I think it probably makes sense this time around introducing yourself in more detail and just discussing a little bit about your newsletter, which again is arguably one of the best in the space. Which is very timely because it's just been the latest edition has just gone live.
Yeah. So Joe Amador, I focus on, and our firm focuses on head of product solutions or services for really firms that are in the decarbonization and digitization of real estate space. So that can be energy management, IoT solutions, analytics solutions around equipment analytics, background very much in product management. And the work we do can touch the vendors, small and large. It can touch investors where they want help on diligence, and really the whole ecosystem. There are cases where I work with owners of real estate that are looking to buy a solution. The newsletter is a monthly newsletter that we publish, and it's pretty formulaic. We cover a lot of the same things we cover on this these weekly LinkedIn Lives, M&A, partnerships, investments, product launches, and then a lot of other relevant news that comes up that reports interesting data. We've started doing some more coverage of the public OEMs and specifically how they're talking about the market opportunity for technology-enabled services. We'll probably do some other deep dives. One of the big topics is data centers, which we won't really, I think we'll touch on that at the end here, but obviously a lot of data center needs around AI and just growth of technology in general. And they need a lot of cooling. They need a lot of power distribution, all things that are touching our ecosystem and our industry. So we published it. It's a free one. Smart Building Insight is what it's called, and it's on Substack. You can find it all the places you would find your newsletters.
There we go. And if you haven't seen one of these before, each week has a different theme, from partnerships to M&A to investment. Today we're going to focus on partnerships. There's quite a lot to get through as per. Again, some in the grand scheme of things, perhaps relatively old, a few weeks or a couple of months old, but still relevant, talking about what the partnership actually means and looks like.
Yep.
And then a couple of really relevant and relatively new partnerships. So when we did our prep, Joe, we were talking about Cisco, which is obviously a large tech player within the space, and for the last 5 or 10 years, they've made a ton of different strategic partnerships, and there's one that's been done with Honeywell. So talk us through just a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so Cisco's a really interesting firm. Obviously, most people who are watching this know Cisco. They're a networking company. They make a lot of the networking hardware, networking gear that just makes everything connect in buildings, in the physical infrastructure, but buildings certainly. And they've over, I would say, 8 to 10 years have tried to get into what I would consider smart buildings and or kind of smart workplaces. And you could argue smart buildings are the foundational infrastructure. A lot of what a JCI or a Honeywell or a Schneider do or a Siemens are doing, there is a network there, right? You're connecting a lot of different things together, valves, actuators, field controllers, supervisory controllers. And so Cisco has shown an interest in that for a fair bit of time. I don't know that they've really dominated that market. I think part of it is trying to figure out where do we fit in. But even back in 2016, I have a tracker on our website for partnerships and for M&A, and there was a JCI Cisco partnership back, I think in 2016, 2017, that you can go find that press release. And there's been a few others. I think they announced a partnership with Philips back before Philips had spun out Signify being the kind of the building controls, lighting controls piece of the business for commercial buildings. So this is not a new announcement. This announcement was somewhat similar. They, through this network, they're allowing a lot of devices to connect. So if you're trying to figure out, well, who is in the building and are there any people in the building, and they're not the only company who can do this, but a cell phone, an iPad, a computer, those are all indicators that there are folks in this room versus that room versus the other room, because all of those rooms are likely to have a gateway for internet connectivity that is very likely Cisco. It doesn't have to be Cisco. So Cisco has had this concept of the digital ceiling, where in the ceiling where you have the Wi-Fi access point, is that a foundational element of a lot of data around your workplace? And so this announcement kind of fit in with that same theme. We as Cisco can tell you if there are people in a room. You as Honeywell are able to actually control comfort and climate in that space. And so that was what that partnership was centered around. Cisco has an interesting approach. I think they partner with a lot of other companies I would put in that workplace category, where you have an app, you want to know, are there people here? We can give you those data streams. Oh, you're muted.
When you think about big companies like Cisco, obviously have a ton of workplace technology and just a variety of others, you would think that they may not necessarily need these type of partnerships. And you touched on the likes with JCI, Philips, others. What would you say the difference is with using Honeywell as a key partner?
Yeah, I think that the common theme I see for all of these partnerships that Cisco has done is that they're really trying to access the existing channels to market. So as a buyer, who is the buyer typically of a Cisco solution? It's probably the IT team. Maybe it's a team within the IT team. It could be cybersecurity, could be, workplace, for example. I don't see them as commonly being a buyer of Cisco. They're definitely a user, a consumer of those systems. They obviously want good internet connectivity. And then you look at Honeywell. Well, Honeywell is really in the buildings where they already have their systems. They have service contracts. They're absolutely delivering the comfort, and they want to deliver increasingly energy solutions, efficiency opportunities. So that's where I think the partnership makes sense for a Cisco. It gives them access to the people who are the actual buyers of a solution that may benefit from Cisco, but may not be a common Cisco client or buyer.
Okay, got it. Interesting. So the next one that we wanted to talk about, which I'm particularly a big fan of this organization, IBM, I say recently, but in the last 2 or 3 years, and acquired Envizi, and IBM has now partnered with JLL. What does that partnership look like?
Yeah, and we I think wanted to mention, but ran out of time last week. The Envizi product obviously is a one of the kind of core sustainability data.
Not sure what happened there.
I got the boot off the stage. It kicked me into the backstage area. I don't know.
I'm not sure. We've not had a technical difficulty for a very long time.
No. So
IBM,
anyway, so IBM has a pretty good data platform. They also have Maximo. They have Tririga. So they have a lot of capabilities around asset management, workplace, and then energy and sustainability data management. So you look at that's the product, and a common buyer of IBM, like what we were talking about just now, is not always the sustainability leader, the energy leader, the facilities leader. It might be the IT team or the CIO's office, CTO's office. So they're partnering with JLL. JLL obviously has a lot of strong relationships with a lot of building owners and operators. That can be commercial real estate, that can be large corporation. And JLL does have its own technology. They've made a history of acquisitions. But I think when you look at an organization like a JLL, there's a diversity of buyers, there's a diversity of users on their client side. And there's also just a diversity of teams that are actually delivering solutions. Any of these facility management firms are like that. So I saw this as an opportunity for them to just grow kind of their stable of offerings and solutions that they could bring to their clients, and say, this is something that we have. And it didn't, the press release didn't give a lot of detail. It talked a little bit about just, advancing technology, advancing deployments. You could argue there might be some channels, not channels like sales channels, but like, this is the solution we sell to the large banks. This is the solution we sell to the large tech companies. It could be also much more flexible, where if you work for JLL now, you just have kind of a range of offerings and you can bring them. I do think that there is a strength for a JLL type organization to be able to say, we have our own offerings, we have other offerings, and you can pick which one. And we work with them, we can deploy them, regardless of what they are.
Yeah, I think it's smart because, if you look at JLL or any big FM or owner-occupier, they may have technology that they've acquired, but it may not necessarily fit all of the spec that a building owner is looking for. Is that the same as the Cushman and Wakefield and Measurable partnership, kind of similar boat, or is there differing reasons for that one?
I think my read, it's very similar. Measurable is the Measurable product and the Invisi product are very similar in terms of what they provide. If you did like a full, sometimes clients ask me to do a full review of capabilities. I wouldn't say they're 100% or they're matching, but they're, of all the companies in the ecosystem, they're pretty close matches. If you have one of them, I wouldn't suspect you'd be buying the other or considering to buy the other. Both good products, both have a longstanding history in the industry. I would say IBM has a broader set of capabilities, asset management with Maximo, a lot of other kind of IoT use cases around workplace that you get from Tririga. So there's maybe a wider offering, but yes, I think that the FM providers are not necessarily looking for exclusive relationships, but I do think they want to differentiate a little bit from each other in how they're partnering with technology companies, or who maybe they're partnering on the technology side.
And if you think about Measurable and also Invisi, very ESG heavy. But if we go back a step and you think about some of the acquisitions JLL have made more recently, the likes of Hank, do you see the likes of building operational tech, like smart building tech, as opposed to ESG tech? Do you see that also being a trend where these large FM or IFM companies try to partner with them?
Yeah, JLL has also bought Building Engines, which is more of a CMMS, pretty significant player, had been a little more focused on commercial real estate. There was a company in Europe, Envio, that was a little under the radar for the US market, but it was also more on the operational side. So I don't know that their strategy is necessarily partner for ESG, build it ourselves, or build it ourselves for facility management. But I think if you looked at which is more core to JLL, they have a very big and significant integrated FM services business, which is it can be actual people who work for JLL who are in your buildings actually fixing and maintaining equipment. That can also be janitorial services, cafeteria services. Some of that is outsourced, but so they're doing a lot where they're in the building on your behalf, making sure the building runs. And you think, well, a next step is a software solution to drive the staffing and tasks within the facilities. So you could argue that's why they would want to own a business like a Building Engines, whereas when it's sustainability management, they might view it as, this is important, but it's something we can partner on.
Before we move on, just a quick question. Could you see the likes of a Cushman and Wakefield or a JLL become a MSI, Master Systems Integrator?
It's actually a good dovetail for some of the other discussions we want to have. I think they could. What I've definitely heard about MSIs more broadly. So one, it's a hard segment to necessarily discover if you're the buyer, right? I have a building, I have multiple buildings, I want to find an MSI. One of the themes I've heard from the buyers who have found an MSI can be it's hard to find one because a lot of them are smaller teams. They're not necessarily national brands as much as maybe regional brands. So you could argue, well, where can a JLL step in there? Well, one, they probably already know amongst their clients where are their MSI opportunities. So there's an ability to bring the solution to the clients that maybe want the solution but don't know where to go to where to find it. I think the technical capabilities are not insurmountable. I think there's a lot of technical depth you need to understand about how building systems work, connectivity between building systems, the nuances between, let's say, an older Siemens system and an old train tracer system, just to throw two names out. And you don't necessarily get all of that by just understanding how control systems work. So, you could also argue a JLL might already have a lot of engineering staff and talent that knows that and maybe hasn't, though, been used or utilized to do a lot of master systems integration. So while on one hand, I haven't seen a lot of signs that they're jumping into that business or any of their peers, a Cushman, a CBRE, maybe a Colliers you could put, I don't think it's a stretch to think maybe that is something they'd be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, they've got good footprint across the globe. I think perhaps what they would need to strengthen is like you said, that technical expertise.
Yeah.
Someone that's able to be regionally focused to deploy.
One quick add I'll make, touching on the newsletter. So I wrote a little write-up on digital and connected services. And so a lot of the big OEMs that make controls, HVAC, are talking a lot about digital services, connected services. That means different things. So I unpacked that a little bit. But there was one slide from an investor deck, the quarterly decks that all these public companies are releasing, from Cushman, and they said one of the overarching tailwinds for their business was just more outsourcing of facility services. And that's just a trend. I've seen that elsewhere, but this was really good data and it was more recent, where they just said over time there's going to be a nice CAGR of growth in our integrated facility management business, simply because more and more owners of real estate are going to say, I want to outsource facility management services. You could argue that really they were speaking to just the core services, people, engineering talent in the buildings, making sure they run. That might be a door opening. I think to make them more efficient, right? Augment with technology. But the next step there could be more integration of systems, more MSI work.
Okay. Yeah. No, we'll see. Speaking of MSI, and it was a good segue. Not deliberate, but one of our good friends, industry legend Brian Turner, recently sold the software piece of Buildings IoT.
Yeah.
He's now moving back to OTI, which is a MSI across the US and I believe Europe.
I think so. Yeah.
They've recently partnered with Code Labs, which again I can't see much detail on. Perhaps we'll lean on to you to see what you might think of.
Yeah.
That. It's a pretty interesting partnership.
Yeah, so it is interesting, and the press release noted an exclusive partnership between the two firms. Well, at least OTI is exclusively using Code. Code, I do not think is exclusively selling through OTI from my reading of this. But you're right. So MSI services, there is a very large talent component, right? I'm going into a building, I as a vendor, not an individual person, and I'm going to take a variety of systems and integrate them. And that can be as simple as, well, you have an access control system, you have a lighting control system, you have HVAC or controls, building control system. Maybe just simple things like, I don't want to set 3 different schedules because my building is opening and closing and the schedule is the same. So very simple use case, but that gives you a sense of, is there a way to not have to set 3 different schedules? There's also just this ongoing talent issue where when I've talked to, let's say, a university or just a campus, like a hospital campus, they might have 2 or 3 different building automation systems for HVAC control. And you sometimes talk to the chief engineer, the head of facilities, who says, oh, that individual is my expert in Siemens. That individual is my expert in Schneider. And the systems are similar in principle and in concept and in framework, but the interfaces are totally different. So it would almost be like a very complex version of Mac OS and a very complex version of Windows. You might have individuals who know Mac really well, don't know Windows, and vice versa. So an MSI can also bring just this ongoing abstraction layer, is the best way to think of it, where you don't need to learn the Siemens system or the Johnson Controls Metasys system or the Carrier, the ALC. Mead was on a few weeks ago. You don't need to learn how to use ALC. You just need to understand principles of schedules, set points, sequences, the kind of core controls knowledge. And the MSIs bring that to the table. Code historically is a really good platform, I should say historically and moving forward, for that, because they do provide that abstraction layer. I think my read under the lines is Code has taken on venture funding. Code is clearly looking to grow fast, like a lot of venture-backed firms. And being an MSI service provider and technology provider, that's one, the valuation is going to be different. And I just saw this as more Code leaning into, we want to be as good of a technology provider as possible. And to do that, to deliver a full solution to our end users, we need firms that are out in the field that can deploy for us. Very logical move. I think the investors of Code are probably looking at this saying, yeah, this is going to accelerate your growth. This is going to allow you to focus on technology. I think years ago, Code did some of the MSI services themselves. They might still do some of that, but more and more, I would expect them to become more of a pure software company. And this is an announcement that I think gives them the ability to focus more on software and let firms like OTI focus more on deploying ongoing management of the buildings if there is some kind of ongoing systems integration work.
100%. I think it's fair to say as well, MSIs are fairly hard to come by. So they'll have a good partnership with Brian and his team.
Yeah, that's the other theme. To my point earlier, it's hard to find an MSI. I've heard definitely from individuals who say, yeah, we found this MSI. They have an office in New York. We'll fly them to California because they did such a good job. And it's just the cost of flying people across the country is less than the risk of trying to find somebody new. And yeah, so exactly.
Couldn't agree more. Couple more to go then. So Logitech, which again is a huge organization.
Yeah.
Who make a ton of hardware for workplace. They've now recently partnered with Envoy. What does that one look like?
Yeah. So Logitech is interesting. A lot of people know that name, especially if you have, phones, and they make a lot of peripherals, but they have a whole business unit focused on workplace. And that can be hardware plus software. So that can be when you go to a desk, a hot desk, you just put your computer down, it connects, it gives you kind of the experience of just working in almost like your desk, but it isn't actually your desk. So they make a lot of interesting tech there. There's some software underneath that, room booking, things like that. Envoy is a company that has been around for a number of years. They're actually, I was joking during our prep that they're almost like a prop tech company that doesn't really think of itself as prop tech, doesn't really go to a lot of prop tech events, but they started making that ubiquitous guest management system. So you'd go into an office, you'd on an iPad put your name in. Some people criticize them because you could embed an NDA into that, and it was just like sometimes people didn't even realize I'm signing an NDA, just I'm here for a meeting. But regardless, it would then notify whoever you're there to meet, and it would give you a text or a phone or whatever it was. So Envoy has grown. It has a lot of different apps. They're kind of using a very similar Silicon Valley playbook of build a beachhead, build a business, and then sell more apps. And I don't know if it's absolutely seat licenses, but generally speaking, each app you're paying more money. So they have like a package solution where if you're receiving packages in the mailroom, it makes it easy to check in and out, or not check out packages really is what you're doing, and then saying I've delivered this to the desk of this individual. So they've increasingly tried to get more into the workplace. They talk a lot about just making the office frictionless, and that makes sense, but it's also kind of a general term. But this partnership was really around their ability to book rooms, their ability to book, their software's ability to book rooms, desks, things like that, and then the Logitech capabilities, which I view them as a little more hardware centric. And you could argue if you have some Logitech capabilities in some parts of your building, but you really want a office-wide ability to find a desk, find a room. So it makes sense. It's very much on the workplace side. And I would say Envoy seems, I forget exactly, but they say they're in, I think, low tens of thousands of workplaces. Now, one company might have 50 workplaces, right? So it's not like clients. That number is bigger than you would expect. But they have a lot of scale. And then the Logitech obviously has a lot of scale. So they're both big enough that I think this can make sense. You could think of Logitech partnering with a company like Envoy that is, in its A round or has just raised an A round. Logitech might view that as, you're not really able to bring, they probably both want to bring each other into their own clients for this integrated solution.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, that's an interesting partnership. I think it's also worth noting just on the next one with Shovels and Watt Carbon. It's important to talk about that one just very quickly because we had the CEO of Watt Carbon on recently.
Yeah, so McGee was on a couple weeks back. So what Carbon is doing generally is a variety of things to add transparency, but they're building out a marketplace, and what they're trying to do is connect firms or solutions that can reduce carbon emissions with other firms or end users who are trying, instead of to buy a credit to plant, for example, trees in another country to reduce their carbon emissions, to kind of fund these projects. And so there's a lot of infrastructure that McGee and the team have been building to enable that. From that, one of the first offerings they had was the ability to in real time calculate carbon emissions, right? So like on the grid, like you're using a kilowatt hour of energy this hour. What is that in carbon? And that's going to fluctuate, right? Because they've been building a lot, but what they're now starting to do is partner with companies who say, we actually want to use your marketplace to kind of power or supercharge our carbon emissions reduction opportunities. And there's financial aspects there, there's transparency aspects there. And so I saw this with Shovels, which is kind of a newer name, smaller company, as they want to access the marketplace so that as they can reduce carbon emissions, or have opportunities to reduce carbon emissions through their platform, there are others who will fund some of that. And I think this is kind of a big picture. What I love about McGee is he's a really big picture thinker, and he really understands like end to end how this all works, and then how should this work. There was a great podcast that he did. I forget all the participants, but it was James Dice, his Nexus podcast. McGee was on that. He was explaining with, I think it was DR Richardson, who's from Elephant Energy. They install heat pumps in homes, and he was just talking about how like we had a commercial building. They wanted to decarbonize. They funded heat pumps in homes, and Elephant is based here in Boulder too, so that's also just a familiar name. But that podcast, 30, 45, 50 minutes, something like that, really good opportunity just to understand how does this all fit together. And this is just an example of that. Another example of just another company on that platform marketplace.
Yeah, it's really smart. I mean, Boulder sounds like the climate epicenter of the United States. The amount of talent and companies that are there.
It's small but mighty, to be honest. Like I mean, I used to live in the Bay Area. I've been to New York a lot. We are not on par, just to be totally frank. And other people who are watching this who live in Colorado might object, but I don't think we're on par with a California, in New York, maybe Boston. But I think other than those cities, it's a pretty good place to be. There's a lot of just energy. We're not Texas in terms of energy, but Colorado is up there. There's a lot happening across the board, and a lot of folks live in Boulder or Denver, and it's all really close. So.
Nice. So let's finish with Meta.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting partnership with Sage to focus on geothermal data, I think it is. So give us an idea as to why it's important, especially because of like Meta's real estate portfolio.
Yeah, so this is a bit outside of what we generally talk about, but I think it's really interesting. So you look at all the hyperscalers. So these are just companies that operate really large data centers. Meta would be one, Amazon would be one, Apple, Google Alphabet. There's others, but those are kind of the big names. They need to build more data center capacity because they need more processing for more AI solutions. You saw yesterday Apple in its event, they're talking a lot about AI capabilities embedded into the new iPhones. So that takes a lot of data processing, data centers, and they use a lot of energy. I think the breakdown I've seen is 45% of the energy is the actual processing, 45% is the cooling. So it's like they're almost the same in terms of we have to cool the data center, we actually have to run the servers and the racks and everything. And then the rest is various other loads that are, again, small, 5-10%, but still significant. So all of the hyperscalers are looking at where do we get the energy from, because you look at energy stocks. Certain energy stocks are going to the moon, if you will, and NVIDIA going to the moon. There's kind of this picks and shovels angle where, well, I don't know if NVIDIA will be the winner or not. For now, they are. I'll go buy energy stocks, or I'll go buy cooling stocks. Vertiv is a company that makes cooling solutions in data centers. And if you look at their stock, some of the energy companies, especially those that like operate nuclear power. So there's a lot of search for where do I get the power from? Geothermal is interesting. There's a lot of ways you can use geothermal, but the core is just like if you go into a cave, it's always like 50, 55 degrees. So if you're trying to put cooling in, and there are buildings that if they have a well or just a sink of water below them, you can send heat to it. You can pull heat out. There's a lot you can do from a geothermal solution. And this is basically Meta saying we're going to start investing a little bit more in geothermal. Really, for a data center, it's throwing out a lot of heat, right? So you're trying to put the heat somewhere. You're trying to get the heat out of the data center, because if it's too hot, you start seeing that in the processing capabilities of the actual data center. So there's, traditional liquid cooling, or traditional air cooling based on chillers, based on other types of capabilities. There's liquid cooling. There's some, you remember, I think it was Microsoft that wanted to submerge data centers in the water. And the idea there was, we can send, I think the challenge was like putting a data center below water. You can't really get to it very easily. There's a whole host of other factors, but I think you're going to continue to see a lot of companies that operate large data centers. They're going to look at how many more chips are we buying from NVIDIA? Okay, that means how much more data center capacity are we building? Okay, that means what is our energy requirement? And there's really just not enough energy right now to go around. I think if you mapped out what we expect to need in demand and what we're providing today in supply, and so that's why you see these companies. I mean, some of these companies have said they're going to start testing and trying and kind of looking into small modular reactors for nuclear. And I think that's also another trend that, again, a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but there's that. I think the other one that is more direct, and the last thing I'll say, is the cooling optimization piece. That's an area where all of the big HVAC companies and controls companies are talking a lot about it. I think maybe a year ago, JCI had said that 10 to 15% of total revenue, if you netted it all out, they attribute to data centers, which is a really big slice, considering that we're talking thousands of data centers. I think it's like 10,000 in the world, and we're obviously growing a lot. But America has 6 million buildings, and America is, again, more buildings per size of population, but by no means the majority of buildings, right? Like the majority of buildings are not in America. So we have 6 million. I think there's tens of millions of buildings. You just don't have that many data centers, yet they're a huge amount of revenue coming to the big guys.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of really interesting points there that we probably could do a separate episode on data centers, just because you think how on earth these data centers are going to find the energy, how the grid's going to cope, how we're actually going to achieve net zero with all of these data centers. I think it was one of the large tech companies saying that they're 40% over or 40% behind where they should be from a net zero standpoint.
The big guys have been pretty transparent in that. I'll give them credit of saying we had a target, we're not going to hit it. I've also been starting to collect some of the data from what's the energy demand, what's the cooling market opportunity. That is probably a great episode we should have, and we should figure out who can we invite onto the show to talk a little bit more about that in detail. And I think in the next couple months we should do that, because it's a big topic, and it might also be the thing that drives HVAC optimization to the forefront. A lot of solution providers offer that capability. We can use data, we can build a model, we can optimize HVAC. That hasn't seen as much adoption as you would expect. I think in data centers, it might drive a lot moving forward.
Nice. Well, if you're listening to this and you think someone that could be a great guest for an episode like that, please get in contact. That's all we've got time for today. I mean, Joe, as always, great to get some really valuable insight, selfishly, from you. Next week is a pretty big episode. I'll tee you up just to give you the floor to talk a little bit about that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to make it, but it's going to be an absolute stellar episode with one of the leaders in our space.
Yeah, so we're I might leave the special guest as a surprise for people to tune in next week. But anyway, we have a special guest. It's at Blueprint. So the Blueprint team is allowing us to use their set. Obviously, they do a lot of live recordings, a lot of recordings that they tape, and so we're using their set. And it'll be a great talk. I think we pushed it to Thursday, but later in the week, simply because Blueprint doesn't start until the afternoon of Tuesday, and we figured that would be a good opportunity. There may be some special drop-ins, we'll see. But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more broadly, and we're really trying to grow the number of interviews and discussions we do within the same format, just because it's good to talk about the market, it's good to talk about what's going on, but it's also nice to have some guests and have some new faces.
100%. And for those who, like me, will be tuning in virtually, this is one that I highly recommend taking some time to listen into live or getting the recording at some point. Yep. Joe, as always, thanks for your time. I'll see you next week. Fortunately, I won't be in Vegas, but I'll be tuning in virtually.
Yeah, sounds great, Lewis. Thanks again. It was fun.